Well, thank you so much, everybody, for being here, and thank you for inviting me to be in conversation with you. It's really an honor to look at your work and think about it and have a chance to speak publicly about it. So I'm grateful to be here with you today. Yevgeniya and I have known each other for quite some time, and we actually knew each other before we met. So there was a sort of friends of friends being like, well, of course you know Yevgeniya, and et cetera. And for a while it was sort of like, who is this Yevgeniya I need to meet? And then we finally met, and we briefly lived together in Bushwick, and have done many fun things together and have had many conversations, private conversations. So this is an interesting kind of I don't know if culmination is the right word, but an interesting progression to take our kind of long personal lineage of our knowing each other and talk about the work in a public setting. One of the things that really binds us together, I would say, is our common experience of immigration. And being not just an immigrant, but a refugee, and coincidentally at exactly the same age. We were both 12 when our families immigrated from former Soviet Russia, Soviet Union, and your family settled in Philadelphia, my family settled in Columbus, Ohio, and another thing that I think that binds us together is that it's maybe pretty uncommon for children of immigrants and immigrants ourselves to devote our lives to the study of the arts. It was certainly not the road that was most I guess, not a happy choice for maybe our families and something they had to wrestle with, and perhaps because of that, we both studied other things in college. So we both have degrees in other disciplines that I think inform our work now. So anyways, it's really interesting for me to look at the work and to think about all of these commonalities that we share, finding ourselves in New York as artists. And I guess I'd love to open this conversation to hear your thoughts on how you think your experience of immigration and your identity as a refugee and an immigrant and someone who was displaced continues to shape the work, or how does it appear in the work, if it does?
Thank you for talking to me, Leeza. It's a pleasure to do this with you. Well, I think that somebody who has to move and leave something behind and create a new home and become a kind of a hybrid being as a result of this move, they probably always think about childhood and about that formative moment. They can't help but mind that moment. So that's not the only thread or the only theme that runs through my work, but it's a place that I return to think about imagery, to think about language. Well, I can't get rid of my accent, so obviously I'm kind of forever bound to that. And in the way it appears in the work, there are numerous ways. One, I think that there are numerous paintings that appear to be maps or demarcations of location, and it's that I'm always thinking about borders and edges, and I believe that that's also tied to immigration. Touch and materiality. I would say that that's I mean, I actually use materials with which my family immigrated, but I also think the way that I keep or I treasure objects has something to do with psychologically with that time as well. Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe I will start there.
Mm-hmm. I also wonder if this is something that I think, especially with this body of work, that there's quite a bit of materiality happening that is sort of reined in by the image itself. So in some ways, seeing them in person after seeing them as images is always a surprise because their physicality is way rougher than the image suggests. Mm-hmm. And the way the image seems to at times masquerade the physicality of the painting, kind of hide the materials beneath it literally, but also kind of what does that mean conceptually. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the different materials that are hidden within the work, and maybe also address this idea that in your the work is, when it's described, the media it's always oil on linen. And I'm very curious why, and mixed media, right? So I love specificity and your work is so specific, so why not give the actual lineage of the materials in the work?
Some of the materials that are here are wood, sawdust, earth, from certain places where I have spent time that is dried and then mixed with paint. Dresses. There is a house dress from a matriarch in my family who passed last year. Yeah, and some little treasures that I have found and decided to bury inside paint. Why do I not reveal it? I think that, first of all, like any close looker sees what it is. I don't think that I don't know, it's possible that if you're in person, you can kind of decode that. But second of all, I always find, like I've said this before, but I find it that if you're like at a meal, I mean, if you're in someone's kitchen and they're cooking and then you sit down to eat, it's like you don't necessarily want to know that that's cumin and it's just enjoyable to like take in the meal. I find it like really tedious to list and a little bit like, well, here's all the elements of the soup. So
it's like you don't want to reveal your recipe in a way.
I mean, yes, but just because I think it's maybe a bit of a bore or something that no, here is the actual thing you should be taking in, you know. Mm-hmm. And I am very like unhierarchical about materials. It's not. Some of it is great paint. Some of it is crappier paint. Some of it is really high, and some of the materials are just low, like. Mm-hmm. It's dust, you know, so.
But I'm gonna push on this because, you know, naming linen and oil paint does create a hierarchy, right? It suggests that those materials are recognizable as appropriate for a painting.
Right.
And then there is the hidden materials that may not, you know, or I'm not saying that you don't think they're appropriate for the painting. Obviously you do because you put them in your painting. But listing them in that kind of literal way is equating them to linen and oil paint.
I will reconsider it after this talk.
I'm so excited that I have so much power right now to like get Yevgeniya to commit to all these things that I've been wanting her to.
There's another, we should just jump into the other.
You read
okay,
my
go
mind.
ahead.
That's my next thing that I'm gonna like pick some, what's the expression, pick a bone?
Yeah.
Is that it? Okay.
Bone to pick.
Thank you. So we talk about language a lot. We both have a very intense relationship to language. And the idea of translating between different languages, but also translating between different mediums. So when I was thinking about this work, I found it difficult that all of the works are untitled, because I want to refer to them by their name. You know, saying that untitled and that untitled piece equates them all. And the works are so specific that I just, you know, I wonder why you don't give your babies names.
I think, okay, so I love language, and I love that I speak numerous languages and hence have the excuse to be strange and creative with language. I mean, part of the beauty of learning English as a teenager is that you can kind of mold it, right? And you can invent words. And I find that language is this amazing realm for play. And I tend to be most playful when I'm not having to name the paintings, like outside of the studio, when I'm just when I'm in conversation with someone, right?
But so do you have little pet names, like secret names that you refer to them?
I have some pet names, but I think that I find like the most interesting phrases or excerpts of language when I'm not having to do the task of naming. And then like all of a sudden the show is finished and it's 20 paintings and I have maybe a really good title for the show itself, but it feels like a job to sit down and name each painting, and it feels like a different project. So maybe I have to get better at writing down
your associations.
My associations, and I agree that it's so important to name something. You've said this to me before, but before when it enters the world, it should have a name. And I think it's another thing I'll seriously consider for my next body of work. But yeah, it's maybe out of this like grand respect for language that I just take that task really seriously.
No, that makes a lot of sense to me, and I do think it's a really big job, and I feel the weight of the naming very deeply, especially if you have a show coming up and there's pressure to kind of name a whole family, right?
Yeah.
The lineage between these pieces is really interesting, how they relate to each other, their kind of relational proximity. But then the differentiation between them becomes really important too, because I kept wanting to speak specifically about a work, you know, so even if if language isn't the right thing, maybe there's a way around it, maybe there's numbers, or I don't know, something to give them an individuality that does not necessarily start to work within the meaning of the painting, because maybe that's what you're trying to safeguard, right? Like not to put another layer of translation on top of what is already a translation of your expression.
I mean, I think that's partially it too, is that I really, I want to put them out into the world and for the viewer to do some of this work. That maybe it's a place from above and it's some kind of a topographical location, but simultaneously, maybe it's a head. And, you know, and then there's an interesting job to do, but I'm open.
All right. Well, I feel like next time you have a body of work and you
I'm gonna call
me, and we could just figure it out together. So a lot of the paintings in this show, for me, bring up images of shields and talismans and kind of secret codes. How do you negotiate what you reveal? Like how much of an idea you reveal in an image and how much remains concealed or unknowable as a kind of nameable thing in the world?
Well, so much of the work has to do with intuition, really, and process. And that they start with drawings, and the drawings are, I mean, they're quick, but they're pretty specific. And then they're the kind of anchor, they're the initial structure of each of these spaces, of these canvases. And then in some of the paintings, the drawing the initial drawing disappears. So there's almost like a symbol living underneath, and then maybe something new emerges. But composition always remains important, and structure always remains important. And so, so some of these symbols sit more frontally, and maybe they're more discernible, and others are kind of submerged. But I don't make the decision about what will be more or less encoded when I begin the painting. It's something that I understand as I'm working.
And how do you know when a painting is done? If there's like this kind of intuitive sense that allows you to make decisions in your process, and you are sort of giving these open signifiers where things transform from one thing to another.
Yeah.
What's the moment in which you're like, now you're done?
Like I will just say about maybe this work is that it was somehow in the tension of how slowly the layers were accruing, and that there was a point where the mountainous surface, which took a long time to become something interesting and meaningful to me, the slowness of that counteracted the fastness of the drawing that occurred on top in an interesting way. Like I wanted the layer underneath to feel ancient, and some of them did take, between, I don't know, anywhere between 3 and 5 years. But then the drawing on the surface took a week, or it took 3 days. And like, there's a painting that you can't see that's right around the corner, but everyone can walk there and see it after with 2 yellow. So it's a really slow, there was sewing, so bed sheets that are turned into ropes and turned into a drawing. There are wooden elements. All of that is building and building, and then the 2 circles are like, I wanted them to feel like a wing of a bird flew over and brushed it, like it's almost like a rubbing. It's something super fast. And when that difference was right, and it was done.
Well, that makes me wonder about the conjunction of neatness and messiness in the work, because there's, again, sort of like the texture, and maybe some of the application of paint feels pretty free of concern for like boundaries or staying within the line or being just so, and yet the way that you organize the image overall feels very determined and almost like making logic out of chaos. Can you talk a little bit about maybe your attitude towards these 2 sides of the coin?
Some of this it's interesting to be assigning language to this, because it's really a feeling, but like I'm thinking about the 3rd painting on that wall, and how like it went between chaos and control. It danced between chaos and control on numerous occasions. But there was a moment when I understood that it's reined in enough so that there is an anchoring structure, that there is something to for me to hang on to, and to understand that it's like that there are shelves for information, that there are, Yeah, that there is a rootedness on one hand, and then on the other hand, there is enough acting out that keeps it like fresh and alive. Mm-hmm. But what that, I can't name what that moment is.
I like the idea of shelves in the painting, or sort of creating a structure for order, but then within each shelf there is room for disorder or messiness or freedom. I don't know if those words equate in your mind, but that's kind of how I experience, like, some of the demarcations also to me read like palettes, like you're sort of creating little bathtubs for color to hang out in.
Yeah, like the second one.
Yeah.
From, yeah.
Yeah, and just how it sort of shimmers within its own borders. Well, speaking of borders and the various kind of formal techniques you use to create frames, you know, there is the actual way in which you like use pieces of wood or branches to kind of outline a border within the painting, or sometimes it's a whole you know, other, I don't know if it's a piece of canvas, but you could see in that yellow painting that there is something that was added on to the painting, but then kind of its border disappears because it's being unified through color. And then a new border appears with the green. So there's constantly this like negotiation between framing and unframing, and also the kind of this tenuousness of the edge, the way that the central image is never quite centered or symmetrical. There's always a kind of like awkwardness to how it touches the edge or how it floats within the painting. Can you talk about those decisions? Like, how are you thinking about the frame as an organizing principle?
I'm really interested in the various aspects that the frame symbolizes. Like, back to your first question about borders, like geographical borders. I am interested in the way that the edge serves as a kind of hug to the image. And those hugs are like light because there's like dyed edges that give it room, and sometimes it's like more claustrophobic and really kind of tight. I think it's another exciting round to play in. So not just in the center, but like this other space where experimentation can occur. And it's something that creates density to me. Like it kind of condenses everything even further. And yeah, then there's many like dyeing, found materials, color, linen versus burlap versus canvas, undone edge, macrame edge, but my grandmother's dress as an edge. But I think of it as almost like maybe it's just an additional canvas, like it's this other room, like the living room, and then the room where you just, prepare the meal or something.
So the painting is a kind of multi-chamber body in which we could make our way.
Yeah.
There's an interesting paradox in this paintings, I find. On the one hand, each encompasses a world with its own specific weather and light, different signs and symbols. On the other hand, these paintings are pretty intimate in scale. Even the bigger ones feel more like torsos to me, or heads, than an immersive environment. So the roadmaps in a way turn into scarification of the body. suggesting that pain is embedded into every territory. Do you think of them as fluctuating between landscape and body?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
And how do they start? I mean, I know you talk a lot about drawing being a kind of first, but what inspires the drawing?
It's actually, I mean, in this trite way, anything in life is allowed to become a drawing. And that could be something that I observe, like a head of another person on the train turned in a certain way when I'm commuting to work. It can be a conversation, an exchange of words. It can be the space between two buildings as I'm walking in whichever city. And yeah, it's any of those things. But specifically, yeah, here in the other room, there is a head. There are landscapes. Day and nighttime landscapes. There are symbols that stand in for natural elements. There are maps of places from above. There are maps of, like internal maps of the body and guts. Yeah, there's a tongue.
Oh, that's a tongue, good to know. So do you have a kind of ongoing legend, or like a map would have a legend where we understand that like a dot of this size means this and a star means that? I mean, do you kind of develop a vocabulary of symbols that mean similar things as they migrate from one painting to the next?
I think they change. I mean, I'm collecting a vocabulary, but I'm continuously adding to that vocabulary, and what that symbol meant in a previous body of work can change for the next body of work. Mm-hmm. But it's an ever-expanding language. And I think that when I look back at my own work, I think that the symbols were more archetypal before, and then they became more personal. And now, like in this body of work, some of them are personal, and some of them are kind of like deadpan, like there is a heart in the other room, like just a heart, like and here, and there are circles, which, you know, I feel like, for example, when I teach, I'm constantly asking my students to think deeper about shape and to try to come up with shapes that are their own and to travel away from the generic, but in some way, in this show, like the circles, which is it has an obviousness and a kind of universality. I kept on coming back to it as a decision. And hearts too, even though they're so embarrassing, you know, but like I use them in more than two paintings. I mean, it's just that some of them didn't make it to this show. But I think it has to do a lot with, I don't know, like the current state I'm in as a person. It's okay to, I mean, my son's name means heart, but also like, yeah, it's like okay to be overt sometimes, a little bit, and it's okay to be a little cheesy also. I don't know.
I agree. You've mentioned the kind of mountainous landscape of the paintings. So I know you're sort of thinking of them in terms of topography, and these, you know, there are actual maps that recreate the landscape in terms of its kind of relief on the earth. What does that accomplish for you, this idea of topography within the paintings themselves? How do you kind of think about that in relationship to the image that you are making?
Part of it is like a sensual issue.
Sensual?
Sensual. Like that is what feels right and feels good to me. Like I currently, and for the past, I can't say that that's what's going to continue to be interesting to me, but that's a way for me to enter the work. Like I want that kind of surface, and I have to make that kind of surface. Like it's not sold, you know. It's like something that I only. Like what I want to say needs to be said against something that is difficult, like against a difficult surface. So that's one. That's the kind of surface I want. I can only speak against that. But that's what it feels like to me. Maybe, you know, maybe that'll change and I can at some point make like a fresher painting, maybe. This is my idea of fresh, like some of them feel more open. Yes.
With the muck of things.
Yes.
Yeah, I have actually a question that I feel like refers to this. Despite being colorful and sensual in their materiality, the paintings wrestle with difficult and hard to pin down content. They depict labyrinths, unsolvable codes, hidden jewels, maps to inner worlds full of secret longing. What emotions or ideas do you hope to leave your viewers with? I know it's a big one, and I'm sure you're going to say something like, everybody has their own ideas, and that's fine.
Well, I mean, I already mentioned that, I think that I like to work hard when I'm looking at other people's work. And I'm talking about art, but also like literature, for example. I'm interested in labor, intellectual labor, emotional labor, and I'm hoping that the kind of viewer that comes to my work, that they will also greet me with the greet my work with the interest of, with interest of doing that labor. So I hope that my work comes to the viewer with lots of questions. But I mean, I'm aware that it's not light and it's not like easy somehow, and that it's sometimes like a juxtaposition of, well, on the one hand it's like neon and bright, and on the other hand it's like some areas feel like sweaty, or I don't know. I know that it's lots of opposites, but yeah, it's maybe for the kind of viewer who sticks it out, you know, and maybe it's not like love at first sight, and that's okay too. And
well, for me, it is actually kind of love at first sight, but then it gets complicated, you know. So I feel like it's sort of, it seduces. There is something very charming and attention-grabbing and bold, but once you get close and personal, it gets difficult, and there are more questions than there are answers. And I think, I mean, for me, that's one of my favorite aspects of your work, that there's not like a neat kind of tying it all up under, this is my platform and this is what they all mean. So there isn't really an explaining, but they leave me with a lot of emotions. So I think maybe that's where I was going with that question, is, you know, what are the emotions that you're interested in evoking, or maybe if it's less about the viewer and more about yourself, what are the emotions that are being processed?
Okay, so, you know, maybe there's something about nostalgia. Maybe there's something about memory. Maybe there's something about comfort, discomfort. Maybe there's a lot. Yeah, maybe there's missing certain points of my life or certain places, and trying to understand why, or attachment. Yeah, it's things of that nature.
I'm curious, now I'm going to ask some questions that I just want to know the answer to, like in practical terms.
Yes.
What do you use to glue things down?
Just paint. There's no glue.
So oil paint?
Yeah. Oil is just holding it all together.
So that's probably why they take so long, because you need to wait for that to congeal and dry.
Yeah.
Interesting. And then the drawing that you start with, are you staying faithful to that drawing?
No.
I mean, I know you said you cover it up, but is there some kernel of an idea that you're staying true to, or you allow them to metamorphosize into whatever they want?
In some paintings, like number 3 right here, that is a painting where there's a drawing, and that's the drawing, and that's it. Mm-hmm. But in some others, there's a drawing, and then it gets covered up, and there's almost like if you ran your fingers across that painting, there would be another structure underneath, and then a new structure that arises, because there can be new anchoring drawings that appear on the surface. Also with the 2 circles, there are previous compositions, but then there is the sort of final and decisive composition that came on top. Mm-hmm. That traveled against the initial plan.
Against?
Yeah, like I can change my mind. Yeah.
I know, I've seen that happen. So what about your process in the studio? Can you walk us through like what you get in the studio? What do you like to do? Like how do you get going?
Okay, good question. Well, coffee, podcasts, bugging friends about what books they've recently heard on Audible that are amazing. Not as much music these days, just because there's so much, like, I want to be reading and I want to be painting, and there just isn't enough time for both, so I'm trying to kind of do both. Seasons of drawing, and then not drawing almost at all, but just using those drawings to make bodies of paintings.
So you put the drawings up, you're looking at them, or are they...
So I put them in books, like in just notebooks, and then I select, let's say, 10 of them that are interesting to me currently. They're out, I work on paintings on the floor, and then when everything is glued and can be hung up, I just put them on the wall on a nail, and I work on them that way.
So you switch to the
I
vertical.
switch, and I really like what they feel like when they're on the floor, that viewpoint, to what happens when they go up. It's like I like. It's a magical moment. Yes.
It's another thing we have in common. I also love to work on the floor, and then getting that moment when I look at the work is always really like, whoa.
Yes.
Oh no. I mean, or yes.
Or oh no, like that's too small, or that's not actually that interesting, or.
Well, and speaking of size, you know, there is such a interesting scale thing that's happening in this show. Like most of the works are pretty intimate, and then you have this kind of medium scale, or in my mind, kind of torso scale. How do you pair imagery to the size?
That's a good question. I mean, sometimes I intuitively see that something would function in an interesting way if it was bigger. Sometimes it's trial and error, lots of trial and error. Sometimes I make them in both sizes, but then I choose to exhibit them only in one size. Like they sometimes have smaller siblings.
Oh. Like the mama and child paintings
that
of
you
yours.
Yeah, I do.
But
that.
those were made as a pair.
Those
right?
were made as a pair. Yeah.
But sometimes you make versions of the same
Yes.
thing in two different scales
Yeah.
to see what's
A number, for example, of these has an even smaller version in my studio, like an 8 by 10 version. Yeah.
And what do you think that does, like for you? Why is that part of your process?
I think I'm formally solving different issues in different sizes, you know, and there's like wrist action on the 8 by 10 and more of a full arm action on this. I mean, just kind of dorky artist stuff, but yeah. But they all, I mean, also scaling up was, you know, it's an interesting problem because I wanted large ones to have a similar like intimacy as the smaller ones, and
they're equally dense in terms of texture and kind of eventfulness.
I think it took me a while to understand how to, I mean, I worked really large in grad school. And then for a long time, I only worked small when I moved to New York. And then I think it's taken me about 5 years to like relearn how to think about larger spaces again.
So are you thinking of these as large, or are you saying you want to go even larger than
I think of these as large, but I am also working on numerous even larger paintings. But there were some very like obvious things that I forgot and had to kind of relearn, like how your marks scale up, tools scale up, yeah, and all of that.
And who are you looking at these days, or who are you looking at with this body of work? Do you have kind of like stages of looking at certain artists as you're working towards a show, or are there favorites that you always go to for inspiration?
Well, I see a lot of art. I am looking at some contemporary people, but also like a lot of people who preceded us. I was looking at Gustin, I was looking at Delaunay, I was looking at Picabia when working on this show. Well, I just saw the Dana Schutz show today, and it's just hovering in my mind. It's so amazing. I look at her sometimes, but today just blew me away. Yeah, I think I love Paul Klee. I mean, I wasn't necessarily actively looking at him, but he's there. Yeah, just trying to think of who else, but.
Do you put up images of work in your studio?
No, I just have a library. I don't have other people's work up.
But you have art books in your studio.
But I have art books in my studio, and yeah, I looked at a lot of architecture for this show.
That makes sense. And did you actually look at maps as well, like different types of maps?
No, I just walked a lot. Yeah, and looked at buildings, Bauhaus buildings mostly, in preparation for the show.
What do you do when you get stuck, or when you feel uninspired or can't move forward?
I look at old drawings of my own. I also look at photographs from travels. Travel is really inspiring to me. Amazing places that I have seen, or like that I have the desire to see in the future. I think seeing other people's art helps with that, but also like starting new work and starting large groups of work and starting in some new way, or like touching new material, like maybe embedding something in paint that I haven't worked with before can help. Yeah, I don't know about getting stuck that much, because I feel like there's always something to do. I think it helps if you're like curious person, you know. And also other disciplines, like it could be that you read an incredible poem, or you hear jazz, or you like look at the structure of a children's playground, and even that architecture can help. Or like gardening, you know. I think sometimes.
Do you garden?
I have like a little patch of earth in front of my house, and I'm not. I grew up knowing a little bit about plants, so I just garden. Like we planted a fig tree and herbs, and yeah, just a little bit, not gardening, but.
Yeah, I definitely see gardening in the work, tending your own garden type of idea. How we're doing on time? Well, I'd love to open it up to questions. What am I missing, guys? What could we grill this person with?
Hi.
Yeah.
There's more humans.
We got a question up here. Go ahead.
My question would be about how you work, how you plan basically to create your work. You referred a few times during this conversation to the word show. So are you thinking in like shows, in series, or do you create your paintings just one by one and then you assemble them, or somebody else assembles them in different shows? So how is that like lengthy, long-term process look? So do you think about the idea, okay, I will create maybe a couple or 12 or around a dozen paintings with this theme, or you're just going to...
I just need enough happening in the studio. Like I need many problems going at the same time. And that's, I mean, let's say I might know that I have a deadline ahead, but it's not necessarily towards that deadline. It's just working, and that there's enough of like a brewing happening in the studio. And yes, I might know that, okay, I have to finish this by July 15th, but it's not one by one, and it's not really towards that deadline. I mean, somewhere far away, I know it's there, but it's just work.
So you don't work in series, like you don't think about the theme, let's say like, I will create something about my child favorite
No.
or something. You're just going with the flow, whatever happens, right?
I have a series of drawings that I'm basing this on, but the drawings could be, you know, again, it could be different kinds of symbols in these drawings. And I'm just interested in taking these 15 drawings and potentially starting 20 paintings based on these 15 drawings, and then just working. And it doesn't end up being a body of work about a certain thing, but just doing until it's done.
How do you feel about when you hit certain symbols and codes in your paintings, and then somebody else purchased it, and technically you, without revealing it, but you distributed some of your treasures, possessions,
Yes.
to someone else, and sometimes to strangers?
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
Hopefully what I distributed is worthy of other human beings. That's all I can say. You know, that's part of being an artist, is that sometimes others get to live with the weird stuff that you made, and just hopefully it's worthy of their eyes, you know? And then can they ever know what it is that I meant fully, unless we're friends and we've had a beer together? Probably not, but they will make me, clearly something moved them, and they will make meaning on their own. Yeah, and that's, I just hope that, you know, that I don't have to be embarrassed for what they live with, but sometimes, you know, that might be the case as well, eventually. Thank you for your questions. EJ, hi.
Yevgeniya, I wanted to hear you talk a little bit about your use of color
Mhm.
in Stargazer. I feel that I sense the 3 to 5 years that it took you to make the show, because I feel like this painting that I'm sitting next to feels kind of maybe like some of the color choices I felt maybe you were making more in the past. And there's some paintings in this show that have very bright colors with lots of saturation. And I like the way you were making them all live together. And I just wondered if you sensed that, and if so, could you talk a little bit about your color decisions for this particular show?
So the way that I thought about color for the show is that I wanted the paintings to come as close to drawings as possible. So most of the show was made, like not this painting and not a few that are in the back, but by painting the mountains white, like a piece of paper or an off-white, and then working against it like working against a page. So that the line, like in the drawings for this show, most of the lines were made with a ruler with color pencils. Some of them like lines that bleed because the color pencils were watercolor pencils, and some that didn't. And I wanted the brightness of the line to emerge against a lighter background. So like probably 16 of the 20 paintings that are in the show were made that way. And then there are a few that feel like they're like more like relatives of my previous palettes. But that's where the lightness comes from. And maybe a bit of the Mediterranean. Yeah, I wanted them to have like to really be close to the drawings and to kind of glow. Why? I can't answer, but.
Hey, I might have two questions, but I think I'll just try to make it one question. So when you were talking about the paradoxes and the multitudes of reading the work, like it's one of the things that really draws me to your work. It's like how they can be fast and slow, bold and sensitive. Like I feel like touch is maybe the great negotiator, and that's just like my assumption. Like through physicality, you're able to create something that can feel like specific and ambiguous.
Mm-hmm.
Like I can place it, but it's also like nonverbal. So I maybe it's not even a question. Maybe it's just.
But we appreciate the comment from a fellow. Well,
Maybe talk about like if you can like talk about like what you think, if you feel like you are kind of tethering things together from polar opposites, and like what's that thing that you think is negotiating it all for you? Like I thought physicality, but maybe it's more deeper than that.
You make me think about like the way that I teach painting. I mean, you're like that I talk a lot about opposites to my students, but I don't know if I'm consciously thinking about it in relation to my own work, but I definitely like think that way when I'm helping people make paintings. So that's interesting. I don't know if I'll think more, and then when you come over for dinner, then we'll talk about it. Yes. Angelina.
Yeah, I'm sorry, this question is not fully formed, but kind of coming back to where Lisa started about the role of language in your work and being a multilingual person. One of the things that I've always enjoyed in looking at your work and the way that it feels like text can become a glyph and then a shape, like it can kind of traverse from, a letter form that I might understand to one that I don't know because I don't speak the same languages, into an abstract shape, and there's a real course that it can travel. But I almost want to defend the untitled position, because one of the things that I really enjoy about you is there's a kind of
Hmm.
And leaving things untitled, like, I think does ask more of the viewer to kind of like make, like, come, see in person, see with your eyes, and like that kind of inevitability kind of comes through the painting. But in prior visits with you, you would sometimes share poets that you were reading. And so I'm curious if poetry is still a really active part of your creative life, and if writing for you is a part of your process at all.
I do take notes, thank you, Angelina. I do take notes in my sketchbook. Like, they're just phrases, loose phrases. I have not been reading poetry lately because the mood of the current times makes it difficult for some reason to read poetry. But I did do a pilgrimage to Hydra this past summer because Leonard Cohen used to write there, and I do love his poetry. And so that's like a big pleasurable journey that I took right before I worked on a lot of these paintings. Like, I went by myself and breathed air there, so I don't know if that counts, but maybe I breathed in some words. Mm-hmm.
You have a little child.
Mm-hmm.
So do you detach yourself from your motherhood when you create, or does he influence you now?
I think it's like, well, he's not like spending time in the studio with me because he's small and very small, and and so it's impossible to make and like pay attention to him, which is what he needs, but it's definitely just organically folded into my identity as a person. It's like inseparable now. Yeah. So the way I arrange time has so much to do with him. And like the way that because I've never seen somebody learn language before. I mean, I learned a language as a teenager, but I'm watching somebody put together sounds is really amazing. So, I don't know. Yeah, I think it's another thing that's very hard to put into words until maybe I get to reflect on it later, because this is the first body of work I have like fully made since he was born, from beginning to end. Yeah.
Oh, Kate, I think.
I was really interested, one of the things I was really interested in was the discussion of like things being buried in your painting is always something that I've responded to, and that I feel in you as a person, kind of like layers. And also like the not resolving into like an easy read, like there are numerous reads. But I was thinking about, I was looking while you were talking at the lines and how you were talking about the drawing of the painting, like the beginning drawing and then the drawing in the painting. And I was looking at the lines like how they're made out of straight lines that get bent.
Mm-hmm.
So like the curves, there are some curves that are painted, but there are a lot of curves that are made out of little bent straight lines,
Mm-hmm.
which seems almost iterative to me, like a labor process in itself, or a, like a work and even more of like labor on top of labor in a way. And I was interested in, like, when you were talking about drawing with a ruler, do you think that drawing has been influenced by your way of making lines in your painting? Like, was that new to draw with a ruler?
It was new to draw with a ruler. I feel like that's another, like I think about teaching and how like that's something I say not to do, but then I did that, and that felt really good and kind of, I don't know, it just felt right for this whole series of drawings that I made in preparation. And but then I like that it's a different process in painting. Like I like turning bed sheets into ropes and sewing them and kind of delaying the painting. Like I like imbuing the canvas with all kinds of energy beforehand, or like I like that making a line out of little pieces of wood like takes time. It's almost like tiling, or it's something ancient like mosaic. I like that it's not like this, but then when it's glued and there, that there could be like a fast move on top of them. But there's something, yeah, it's something about time. I don't know. And translation, like I'm interested in how a super straight and fast line becomes something slower and sculpted that then becomes something faster when it gets painted. Can't say why, but it's just something that's and you know, we didn't talk about craft, but like that's always something that's part of the work that I'm very interested in, that influences my work. I mean, I like from objects that surround me at home to like early, like knowing how to make my own toys to, I don't know, just, yeah, all that. I think that's. Thank you. Thank you.